It works.
So if you think about martial arts as being able to be defined by opening and closing the body, then you're going to find your shapes easier to do. So you have to define what open and close means. So what would those things mean, you think? Like, what does opening the body mean? I know, it's like, it doesn't make any sense. It's nonsense, right?
Yeah.
That's the problem, is people will only say that and then they'll just let you go and figure it out. So opening is like, say I open my chest, that's like stretching and trying to open up the chest, right? Opening the back is the opposite, right? Stretching and opening my back. Stretching and opening my fingertips, okay? So what ends up happening is you've got open, and then you have close, which is exactly the opposite, right? So if I close my chest, it's the rolling inwards, right? If I close my fingertips, you get into fists and things like that. If I close my elbow joint, if I open my elbow joint.
Yeah.
So you can define all the martial arts by opening and closing. So then the trick is to define opening and closing and what's opening and what's closing in every movement. That's the trick. So like if you're doing Suban, it's like bear exits the cave is your first move, right? You should start with like a big point of view. So it's like, is this movement mostly opening or mostly closing? That's your first job. So like in bear exits the cave, it's mostly closing, right? Bear and eagle in Xingyi Liuhe represent yin and yang. They represent closing and opening. Bear represents closing the body, and eagle represents opening the body, because eagles stretch open their wings, bears open their back, so they close their chest. So then you got to define each movement in Soba as, is this mainly opening or mainly closing? Then once you have an ability to understand what opening and closing are, then you can train directly at it. Do you know what I mean? So like if it's bear first, we know this is a very closed posture. So that means like my shoulders should be sunk, right? My knees should be close together. My joints should all be soft. Do you see what I mean? Like all of those joints need to close as much as possible. And then what's the next move of the set? Monkey stands on a rock, right? So there's going to be parts of monkey that open and parts of monkey that close. Would you call it an open movement or a closed movement? If you were to just have to define it yourself, would you call this an open movement or a closed one?
Opening.
Yeah? What about you?
I'd say more opening in general.
Okay.
Twist to open.
Because there's both, right? There's opening and closing. So it's depending on how you see it.
Right.
So then if you think about it as bear is closed, you can look at this as monkey is opening, right? And now you're going to have a dynamic change between yin and yang from movement to movement. And that changes things a lot. Because Kung Fu is in the transitions between movements, not in the movements themselves. That's something to always really realize. So when you're doing Suba and Lohan, this is why I wanted those to be the two. You need to define opening and closing, and then work on that definition for everything. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool, man. Cool, that'll help.
I know that makes a lot of sense.
Excellent.